So for our third speakers, we have Robert Ward. He is an assistant public defender at the Public Defender's Office here in Mecklenburg County. He works at the nexus of the legal system and mental health and addiction issues in our community, and is passionate about helping others learn how advanced planning for those living with mental illness can benefit them and their family and friends. And with him is Bebe Smith, and she is the Deputy Director of Include, the Mental Health Initiative. Include, which if you look it up, it's capital I-N and then include, is an international non-governmental organization committed to supporting the social and economic inclusion of people with intellectual and or psychological disabilities through collaboration with advocates, activists, civil society, governments, and local communities around the world. Today, Mr. Ward and Ms. Smith will help us understand the importance of advanced planning for those with mental health concerns. Full disclosure, we were connected with this team via a local chapter of the National Alliance of on Mental Illness, or NAMI, for which Rhiannon is a regular volunteer speaker. So thank you so much, and welcome, Robert and Bebe.
Glad to be here.
Thank you all very much. Very happy to be here. And I wanted to say, first off, that I'm a little bit intimidated following the last act. They were very technologically astute, and after you see some of this stuff, at least from my end, Bebe's experience with this, but at least you'll see why you might want to take them up on some of their offers for help. But in any event, I will say mine a little bit more old school, and to so much so that we couldn't quite figure out how to do the screen share. So I'm going to be saying next to move the screens forward. But anyway, my work at the Public Defender's Office began in 1986, and I have done a number of things. I did the usual trial work and and appellate work as well. I ended up with drug treatment courts, helped start those. I did that for about 20 years. But seeing the impact in the system on mental illness issues, about 80% of our caseloads tend to be driven by underneath them issues involving mental health and addiction. I kind of wanted to get at at kind of an earlier stage of the process, so I came into the civil commitments. I represent people that are involuntarily committed, and that's also how I learned about advanced directives. And these are ways that I see that you can avoid an arrest, you can avoid even a commitment if you are astute enough to do these things. And it's more than just for people that are in a chronic state. This is also something that or an acute crisis. It's something that needs to be there just in case something were to happen for you or a loved one in your family. These things, mental illness can impact a family when children go to college. It can happen because of an accident. It can happen in elder care issues. But I had a case that I was working on where the lawyer that I knew, his son had was hospitalized and was my client, and I'd been trying to get advanced directives together, and yeah, Bebe, you can go on the next slide. We tried to get I had been trying to get advanced directives promoted, but it really wasn't working. And but this particular lawyer came into court. His son was having a difficult time. He was recycling in and out, didn't want to take medications. They'd advised guardianship, the hospital had, and they said, the lawyer said, we don't really want to do guardianship. He's fine when he's on his meds, but when he's off his meds is when we need some additional authority. And it was really through that contact I then called somebody at the National Center for Psychiatric Advanced Directives, which happens to be right here in North Carolina in Durham. And there's a lot to that story, but it ended up with me working on a project, and that's how I got to know Bebe. Bebe was the director for the Crisis Navigation Project, and we've been working on this for several years. And this work here is pretty much comes out of that. Next slide then. Yeah, and you'll see, I'm going to let you read the slides. I'm not necessarily going to read each one of them, but if you would go ahead and just move to the next one.
let me just stop and say a little bit about the Crisis Navigation Project.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
It was a project that was a collaboration between Southern Regional AHEC, where I used to work up until just a few weeks ago, and Duke University's Department of Psychiatry. So a lot of the work that I've done on psychiatric advanced directives was kind of rooted in the work that Marvin Schwartz and others at Duke had done for probably more than 20 years. But our project was designed to promote the use of these tools. And I was grateful to be able to meet Bob and other colleagues in the Charlotte area to do the work there. All right, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. And I was going to say, Bebe, I think you're going to go help introduce the video too. And so I'll let you go ahead and proceed.
Okay. So just to give you a little bit of history, I'll just talk about this a little bit, Bob. So
Yes.
these developed out of that movement to give people more voice in healthcare decisions, and we're rooted kind of in the advanced care planning that goes around end of life. So there's a federal law, the Patient Self-Determination Act of 1990, that states that people should be given information about their rights in medical settings and what they can be offered information around advanced care planning. That was mostly around end of life issues, but the same principles apply to mental health treatment. And so these are kind of the similar tools, but for people in mental health crisis, kind of advanced care planning for mental health crises. One of the things we were able to do through the Crisis Navigation Project, and this was a project that lasted for 4 years, funded by the Duke Endowment, kind of an implementation initiative. But at the very end of the project, we were developing some educational materials and were able to tap some of our community partners in Charlotte. So I think this is just a short video that will give you some background, but will also give you the voice of lived experience. So the importance of that in promoting people having their own voice. So I'll go ahead and play this.
Hi, my name is Amanda Martin, and I am the Director of Community Initiatives for a nonprofit located in Mecklenburg County called Promise Resource Network. Outside of my job label, I wear a lot of other labels in the community. Some of them are self-imposed, and some of them not so much. And I'm fighting every day to destigmatize all those labels. But some of them are previously incarcerated person. I spent 5 years incarcerated with the Department of Public Safety here in the state of North Carolina. I'm also a person who is in long-term recovery from substance use. And I'm also a person who is in daily recovery for my mental health challenges. Some of those challenges led me to be incarcerated in other ways, whether that was self-induced because I chose to go to the hospital, or whether it was because someone made that choice for me. Being in the hospital is absolutely one of my lived experiences, and it is the hardest one for me to bounce back from. A lot of things were taken away from me when I was institutionalized in the hospital, and so the bounce back from that has been rough. One of the things that I have been able to use in my recovery and wellness, and now I'm able to facilitate so that other people can utilize these things, is what is called Psychiatric Advanced Directives. And though I have not had to use my pad since I have had it, I do have one in case something happens, and I am involuntarily committed. Because the reality for me is that I never know when that can happen for me, when my wellness just isn't there and I'm hospitalized. So Psychiatric Advanced Directive is a legal document. It's a legal tool that is written into law that allows me to have my voice and choice heard when I am in emotional distress. When maybe I can't speak for myself, it allows me to have other people in my life that can speak for me and share my wishes is ways I can make sure that clinical staff hears me as well as my family and friends. So I have found a lot of value in psychiatric advance directives. If I could share one thing with mental health professionals, psychiatrists in particular, about the value of psychiatric advance directives, I would say this: your job is to do no harm. And when we intentionally or unintentionally leave out information that could be imperative to someone's wellness or success, that is doing harm to someone. Whether someone is in the middle of a psychiatric crisis or whether someone's on their journey of wellness and is rocking that thing out, all of those individuals deserve and have the right to have a voice and a choice heard. As a professional, whether it's a professional as a psychiatrist, as a clinician, or me as a peer support, I am here, you are here, we are here to plant seeds of wellness, resilience, and recovery in everyone that we come across professionally. So I want to challenge psychiatrists and other clinicians, other people that hold roles in a professional level within the mental health system, to value that voice and choice for others as much as I value it for myself, as much as you value it for yourself as well. Plant the seed of wellness, and it's okay if you don't get to see it grow. Hopefully there are other people in that person's life that can water that plant, that can water that seed, that can watch it grow and harvest and bring all the beautiful fruits that people like me are capable of producing and are worthy of having the chance to produce. And sometimes all we need is that one person to hear our voice and our choice. And that is empowering. That is a powerful, powerful tool that you each have to give to people that you run across every day that you provide services for. You offer them power. You offer them a seed that can be watered and grow for years to come. And I promise, we don't forget about the people that walked with us on our journey, and we don't forget about the people who truly invested in us and truly wanted to see no harm done to us. Some of the barriers that I have experienced and that I've heard from the experience of other people around getting a psychiatric advance directive is fear. System involvement causes fear on many levels, causes re-traumatization in ways that people that have not experienced trauma or system involvement may not understand. But there's a lot of fear involved with being a part of the system again, whether that is the medical system, the criminal justice system, the school system. In some cases, there's a lot of fear around that. And when you throw in both the medical system and a criminal justice system together, people experience a lot of fears. So to hear that a PAD is a legal document can strike fear in the heart of people in their minds as they consider, do they want to create this document or not? Another barrier is people aren't able to hear about these things at the end of their inpatient treatments while they're in hospitals. This isn't given out freely to individuals as they finish their inpatient stay, as they come to the end of their IBC. All these things, no one is giving information about psychiatric advance directives, about having a voice and a choice. No one is telling the people that are in the hospitals that there are these options. So lack of knowledge is also a huge barrier. And that's lack of knowledge on both the recipient, the person receiving services, and the people giving services. I heard from someone that psychiatric advance directives were not covered in clinical rotations and in the knowledge that clinicians get. And this is a disservice because that is a barrier to why other people who really could utilize a psychiatric advance directive are not creating them because the people who they trust to give them service know nothing about them. And then they're fearful when they finally do find out about them because they're tied to a legal system and a hospital system, both of which have disenfranchised them and have oppressed them to this point.
All right, thank you, Bebe, and thank you all for staying with us on this. I'm always touched by the folks who've been through these experiences. I think you know, what you hear from Amanda is someone who would have liked to have had something different for her, and you know, that's something that really had kind of troubled me. I mentioned I started in 1986, and I actually started with doing involuntary commitments. Did that for about 10 weeks or so, and it really kind of gave me a bit of an eye to being able to see and identify people who might have mental illnesses as clients, and so I was able to sort of target them and help them, whether whatever kind of disposition might be in place, because you know, by and large, I found that people are helpful understanding at individual levels if somebody has more of a mental illness and that's driving it, than if there's someone who's more of a predator, or someone, you know, who is able to make rational decisions and so forth to control their behavior. But you know, this cartoon here, I mean, I think it's fairly simple, but it tells the story of what's been going on for the past 50 years or so. There's a lot of history to what's happened here in this country, mental health. There's a real push to stay out of institutions that were very, very bad for folks. Unfortunately, they didn't create new institutions or create community services to deal with them. What you basically did was shut down a lot of facilities and then put people on the streets, or a lot of people coming into the jails. I see a lot more people in the jail that we never saw before, and it's largely because of in my opinion. And by the way, what I say here is this is my observations, my opinion. I'm not making any official statements. It's just somebody who's been in practice for a long time and trying to make sense of some of the things that are happening. Basically, this is, I mentioned this because this is kind of an indication of the need for advanced directives, that we have a lot of people out there who lack a lot of care, and they are more likely to be coming into a hospital setting, a crisis situation. And I've told people before that if you're familiar with IEP plans or 504 plans, or if you have a student in school who's got a special need, there's a plan for that, and there's federal law that protects it. That's not the case when it comes to adults with mental illness. There is no, in the hospital system generally, or the legal systems, there is no IEP plan for somebody coming to see you all in your law offices. You know, you may pick that up, and you may see that there's some issue with someone, and you may have some personal knowledge about how to deal with this after some experience. But it isn't something that I was trained for, and I don't think it's something that we are trained for to begin with. Next slide, please.
Bebe and Bob, I do have a couple questions. Is this a good time?
Sure.
Okay. So my first question is about Mecklenburg County. Do they have a county POA that could step in if there's not a mental health directive similar to the county estates administrator? And then I also have another question after that.
A county POA. I think I know what that might mean. If they can elaborate on what the POA stands for.
Not sure. Let's see if Sylvia, if you could maybe follow up with
I'm not aware of. Yeah, it may be like a power of attorney. I don't know. These are not regulated at all, and I'm not as familiar with guardianships, but I will tell you that there's nothing like that any sort of formal legal process that's in place to deal with powers of advanced directives and healthcare powers of attorney. They do sort of work together. We're talking about PADs, but it's good to have the healthcare power of attorney, so you can have someone who's helping you with surrogate decision making.
Right, she did mean power of attorney. I guess she's looking for a county power of attorney that could step in.
Yes, no, I would like to have greater institutional practices in place. And that's part of the reason we're giving this talk, I think, to try to get the word out. Right now, this is something that is for individuals, believe it or not. This is something that if you or your family members or somebody that you know or some clients that you have who have been maybe struggling with some of these things, one way to sort of help avoid legal problems in the future is actually sort of come up with, the advanced directive and the psychiatric advanced directive and the psychiatric healthcare power of attorney. I also recommend RAP plans, but we'll get to that at a later point. So
I do have one more question.
Yes.
So it was said that 80% of cases you deal with have underlying issues of mental health and addiction. If this is the case and the U.S. is undeniably facing overcrowded prisons and jails, is law moving forward to treat addiction and mental illness so that it's an illness rather than a crime?
Correct. Yes. No. The studies that are out there, if you go, and this is a mix. It's not like everybody has them, but there are variations. But roughly about 80% of the folks that are in the prison system, that are also in the jails and in the court system, have some degree, and it may be something that excuses behavior, maybe just something that's it's part of who the person is, and so what you're going to be doing dispositionally makes a difference. But also, I know of a study here in Charlotte some years ago from the ER that about 80% of the people that come to the EDs, the emergency room departments, also have those underlying causes. It may not be that they are there for that reason. I have have schizophrenia and something's happening right now, but accidents, injuries, other kinds of things. And this was done by ER doctors in conjunction with a grant from the ABC board here in Mecklenburg. But yes, that's another reason why I'm here, is to say that yes, we have a tremendous mental health, ongoing chronic mental health crisis and pandemic. And I'll get into some of that at a later point. The slide here kind of shows this person kind of stuck in a bottle. And what I like is what Judge Howerton said. He was our judge in the treatment court, and how he said, if a city council person or county commissioner has a son or daughter or loved one who's got an addiction problem or a mental health problem, and they're having some behavioral issue, do they pick up the phone and call the police, or do they want to call a treatment person? So the real question is what kind of a response, what kind of a story you're going to go with. Okay, maybe next slide. So I'm going to very quickly go through these. You can imagine at our office, we handle criminal trials, but we do handle the civil commitment proceedings because it does involve somebody's liberty. And another time I can kind of get into that setting. But both of these, a crime is you've got a warrant and so forth, or with the civil commitment you have a petition. And both of these are reactive legal documents. Something bad has happened, or something wrong has happened, or some harm has happened, and so now the legal system steps in. And what's interesting is that for me is that if you look at what happens, and you can see this in the civil side too, with a domestic proceeding, for instance, a divorce or child custody issue or something, but on the front end of the system, we deal with an event or some factual situation that may trigger the official involvement. But at the back door of the system, now you're looking at the person and kind of what the future is, what's going forward. And so these questions down here: what happened? Why did it happen? What are the present long-term options? What are we going to do about it? Those are the kinds of questions. A lot of the work at the public defender's office is where we sort of pick. We deal with. We kind of help to kind of provide an exit strategy for helping people. And it was in this context that I learned more about addiction and about mental illness and the impact of families and what works and what doesn't. Next slide, please. So, when we go into handling these situations, in many respects, it's like that parent who finds out their child maybe has, bipolar condition, is being expelled from school. What you're trying to do is you're trying to refer them to appropriate treatment, trying to come up with some sort of plan. And then the opportunity is lost. As you get into this, you discover a system that's fragmented or non-existent, or that has limited things. You can do this, but you can't do that. Next slide, please. But there is hope. That's the thing, is that while we've got this sort of bad news about what's happening systemically, for years, certainly on the addiction side, they've had 12 steps, which started with alcohol, but it's moved on to so many other things. And then they've got mental health recovery, which is a bit different. but usually it involves some sort of holistic piece where you're dealing with it. And Bebe there's some nice slide towards the end of this that kind of shows all the different components of sort of what is involved with recovery. But we know that there are solutions out there. And that's one thing I learned with treatment courts, and that, as we move forward with it, that it was just a matter of us adjusting our process to make to get connected to those resources. As I heard somebody once say that if you're going to treatment, that's discovery. If you go to 12-step meetings and work your program, that's recovery. So you've got discovery and recovery going on. And our system doesn't really have any sort of official practice. And Amanda mentioned that in her talk. She said, look, when you leave, nobody sits there and tells you what to do or how not to come back. Next slide, please. So you all know this, but I'm going to put this in here in case anybody wants slides or copies of it, because I think it's partly the case is that the criminal justice system is a very complex process, and it's very much like taking a chainsaw instead of a scalpel. It is a very difficult thing to do. Many times people will say, well, you ought to just have them arrested. And we will have people get arrested to get themselves help. I once had a guy want to get into our treatment court. He heard about it, but he couldn't get in. So he called the police on himself. He went and sat down said somebody's, smoking crack over at a convenience store. He went there and he sat down and I was going to be signing him in saying that, he possessed cocaine, because that's what you had to confess that you had the stuff in order to get in the program so that you didn't abuse the process. But he said, no, it's not cocaine. And I said, well, we'll wait for the lab test to make sure that that's it. And if that's the case, get the case dismissed. He says, no. He said, I know it wasn't, because I called the police on myself. I heard about this program. I had a friend who went through it. I said, I need to do this. And he said it was flex. I said, well, not a very bright thing to say, but I said, well, how come if you went that far, why wasn't it real cocaine? He said, are you kidding me? I'd have used it. And so you get people who kind of come into the system to get help, largely because there's not the services aren't out there. But then when you get in here, you've got probation officers. As I mentioned in one of the bullets here, the system can be overly strict and overly lenient at the same time. It's not designed as a treatment system. Next slide, please. The civil's commitment system is a custodial treatment process, and it is not one that was designed necessarily to help people that have mental illnesses. It's really designed to protect the system from taking people in who might not have a mental illness. If you have a mental illness, you can't be committed. You have to have a mental illness plus be a danger to self or others. So there has to be a crisis. And a lot of times what people will say, and I get a lot of calls from families, get calls from people at church, families that can be, individuals can be in crisis. Lawyers know colleagues who are in crises. I'm sure paralegals know colleagues who are in crises, but there's no method of intervention until it hits something really serious. But by then, of course, there may be more damage. It can be harder to come back. In any event, when we get the cases, it's largely just to make sure that there's a dangerousness level there, which then allows the state to sort of come in and handle things. So the civil commitment system is not designed as a treatment process. It's really more of a due process mechanism. But it does serve as an authorization process. It does serve an authorization process for the hospital to lock the doors and force meds if they need to, which then allows them to do treatment. But that's also what PADS do. What PADS and the healthcare powers of attorney will do, it actually is your way of saying to the hospital, if I lack capacity, which Bebe will get into, if I lack capacity, then I can, then I'm authorizing you to stay. You don't have to go to see a judge. I'm saying go ahead and keep me and hold me here. And it's good for like about 10 days and so forth. It's not perfect, but it's also valid even if you do a commitment, for that matter, an arrest. You still have a pad that says this is who I am and this is what I suffer from. This is what works. This is what doesn't. It can be a very versatile tool in a proactive sense. Next slide, please. So, I put this one up because I want you to realize that as the questioner kind of observed, this is a serious crisis, but it's getting worse. In 2009, there were about 54,000 plus commitments statewide. Now they're over, and in 2018 it was 104,000. If you read the article that's in this piece, or if you want to write this down, it's Taylor Knopf, KNOPF, at NC Health News. And if you look up IVC and data collection, you should get it. That's basically that link. But we had to kind of put together some numbers to make this happen. It's not really being managed. The state does not pay attention to, officially that is, to the civil commitment process and what's happening. And if you look at COVID situations, how do we measure COVID success or danger? It's the rise in hospitalizations. Same thing, we have rise in hospitalizations here, but nobody's paying attention to it. Puts greater pressure on us as individual citizens to do something about it. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So psychiatric advance directives, they are one way of giving voice and to some extent some legal authority to the individual, to their families, and for that matter, a process for linking the mental health care system better. Because if you come in without, if you have a regular general health care power of attorney that doesn't specifically mention psychiatric, Bebe will get more into that, then your loved one who goes in may not be able to speak with you because it's not authorized for that. I've actually had situations where I've learned of those situations where the parent has come in, the 30-year-old son with a bipolar condition who's creating havoc, has this, and then they can't speak. You can't get any information. It creates a lot of information difficulties for the hospital because they're looking for background information. The client may be, or the patient may be doing okay and be able to be calm in that process, but they don't know about what happened beforehand. Anyway, it can be a bit of a administrative problem as well. But these psychiatric advance directives are a real tool that can help bridge the gaps to some extent that have been created in our present system. Next, please. Next slide, please. So these are some of the challenges that you have as a lawyer, and they do take some time and energy put together, but that's why Bebe's there too, and Crisis Navigation Project. They have, they've got scores of volunteers that can kind of help people go through them and be more the practical side. I do like the idea of having lawyers and paralegals, for that matter, be a part of the process, whether it's in estate planning, and it's probably best in an estate planning type setting. Although you can do them, as sort of the aftermath, or maybe as part of a family settlement or something like that. But they are something that sort of helps people to sort of have a bit of a plan to deal with these situations. And not only does it focus on the legal part, but it really helps them focus on the reality of their condition, that it needs to have some attention, and they really do need to be at the in the driver's seat. Because it's, if you take your medications and you go to recovery meetings and you just get enough sleep and you do these things, your life is better. And guess what? They are less likely to come back into this other system, or, the criminal system or the civil system or the hospitals. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Bebe. Thank you. So, I just want, this is my pitch. I've represented some people from across the spectrum. I mean, it's the wealthiest people in this area, and some powerful people from powerful families. Also, people that have just had a tough assignment in life, and to a person, being healthy and being better is way better than any of the other things that compete for our attention, I'd love to see psychiatric advance directives catch on in a way of making health, promoted as opposed to disease. So with that, I will pass it on for Bebe to kind of explain nuts and bolts. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob. I'll give a little bit of context too, because hearing Bob sort of give this sort of history and what he sees in the legal setting. My background is clinical, and I was counting up the years as he was talking. I've been working in mental health for about 30 years now, if I count my time in graduate school. And early on, I got interested in working with people with serious mental illness, particularly with schizophrenia. That was kind of my clinical specialty. And I worked at a specialty clinic at UNC for 17 years. And then I was teaching at the School of Social Work before I worked for the Crisis Navigation Project. at Southern Regional AHEC. And I think that over those 30 years, I entered the field when the community mental health system, which was a public health system, was still pretty much intact in North Carolina. It probably wasn't at the heyday of the community mental health movement in the 1990s. That was probably more apt in the 1970s and 1980s. But what's happened over the past 20 years is that we have privatized and defunded our public mental health system. So if you are a person who lives with very serious mental health challenges, I believe very much in kind of community-based care, that people can do well in the community, but there are certain things that are necessary. One is being able to meet basic needs, having a place to live, being able to afford housing. A lot of the people that I worked with lived on disability, and for people who receive SSI, I think that's about $750 a month. That might be slightly higher than that, but I think it's still under $800 a month. So if you can imagine what it's like to live on that much money. And then there's lots of people now who I don't think ever were able to access treatment to document that they had a disabling condition. So I think that's part of why we see so many people who are homeless or who end up in jails rather than getting mental health treatment. Our mental health system has really shrunk in North Carolina, and if we've got people from South Carolina too, I would imagine that it's probably similar there. That we know nationally that mental health is underfunded. In North Carolina, particularly, the primary funder of our public system is Medicaid, and a lot of people in North Carolina can't access Medicaid. So there's a whole lot that's gone on. And then you have to look at housing and other kinds of social welfare things that have shrunk over the past several decades. What would it take for people to live well in the community? So when Bob talks about a psychiatric advance directive being like an IEP, an individualized education plan for a child with a disability, I have one of those children who had an IEP, and the IEP required that the school provide services. PADS unfortunately don't do that. They don't require that the services requested in the document are available to the person, but they give the person the opportunity to kind of say, this is what I want to happen in my mental health treatment, particularly at a time when I'm in crisis and I lose capacity. So I'll be talking about the law in North Carolina. If we have people from other states, I'll give you a resource where you can look up what the law says in your state. But in North Carolina, we essentially have two parts to a psychiatric advance directive. One is the advance instruction for mental health treatment, and it's in the NC statutes. And the idea is that you create this in advance of a crisis, and you say what you want to happen in your treatment. And you can put in preference for care. You can consent to treatment in advance. You can also refuse certain treatments in advance. You can state what medications and different things that work for you. They're really most helpful for people who have experienced a psychiatric hospitalization before. And if you have known anyone or are aware of the process of an involuntary commitment, it can be very traumatic. And oftentimes that's the only tool available to families or the community to get someone help. But it's a very traumatic entry into treatment. And most families and most people who go through the process would like to avoid it if at all possible. And there is some, research that shows that a person with a psychiatric advance directive might be less likely to go through the involuntary commitment process. So that's the first part. It's that advance instruction for mental health treatment. The second part is the healthcare power of attorney, and that is the same across healthcare settings. It's not specific to mental health, but that allows the person to appoint another trusted person as their healthcare agent, and then the agent can make decisions about the person's care during periods of incapacity. And again, those powers can be limited or they can be very broad, depending on the person's wishes. When we were doing the crisis navigation project, we recommended that people create both documents because they work well together, but you could do one or either of them. I think many states have laws around psychiatric advance directives, but not all do. But I believe all states have laws around healthcare power of attorney, and so that's something that people can use to include mental health treatment as well. So just more on the advance instruction. To get more specific, people can consent to or refuse hospital admission certain medications. You can say what medications are useful for you, which ones to avoid, and that you can consent to very specific treatments like electroconvulsive therapy or other treatments. The document takes effect if the person loses decision-making capacity. That's just to talk about capacity a little bit, there might be, when might a person lose capacity? If they're unconscious, if they're intoxicated, if they're in the midst of psychosis or mania, or delirious. There's many different kinds of mental conditions where a person might lack capacity. This is just a screenshot of what the document looks like. It's heavy on the legal language, and that is a barrier for lots of people who live with mental illness, in that it's a complicated document. It's not easy for them to just understand. And it's kind of an interesting thing is that, we developed a tool to help people preserve their rights in treatment and to let them plan in advance, but it's very complicated, and it's not just an easy thing for people to develop themselves. So who can make an instructional directive? Any adult of sound mind can make one. I know I have a lot of legal people listening in, and Bob on the call too. What I have heard about of sound mind is that generally we assume that people are of sound mind unless there's evidence that they are not. And anybody, Bob, you can speak to that if there's something I'm missing. The documents also have to be signed in the presence of two witnesses and in front of a notary. The witnesses can't be their relatives, and they can't be their treatment providers or staff of a facility. And those exceptions to the witnessing are designed to make sure that the person's not being exploited by people or kind of coerced into creating the documents. And then after
I do have a question that popped up. What happens if someone has entered a crisis and is a danger to themselves, but they refuse hospitalization? What are the alternatives? And are there cases when certain conditions ever override a mental health advance directive?
Yes. And I've actually got that coming up in a slide, because there are exceptions. And in North Carolina, a lot of power remains with clinicians in these crisis settings. I'll talk about those exceptions. I think that's coming up pretty quick. I know I have a slide that addresses that. But just to go follow the slides at this point, capacity in this, it's a legal term for a person's ability to make rational decisions. In healthcare, the way this is determined, it's a clinical determination. So it's kind of like a bedside decision. So a psychiatrist or a physician who's examining a person, and this is not just relevant in terms of determining capacity, that determination is made by the physician, like kind of in the moment. Like right now, does this person have the ability to make decisions about their care? And if they don't, what do I do about that? And what's the sort of path to who do I talk to make a decision about what to do, particularly in emergency situations? This is just a screenshot of the healthcare power of attorney document. You may be familiar with that one and more commonly see that. Again, the language is pretty complicated for lay people. And then the process for activating the PAD, the person must be found to be incapable by a physician or an eligible psychologist. That then has to be documented in the medical record, and it might be something like, I've examined Ms. Smith and she currently lacks decision-making capacity, so I will refer to her advanced care planning documents for decision-making on her care. That might be what the doctor needs to document in the record. And then the documents are active and can be used to get the person's choices. So then they should hopefully honor what's in those documents as much as possible. And that is same is true for advanced care planning documents around end of life care too. And then if the person regains capacity, because we think about this in terms of most mental disorders, that there may be periods of incapacity, like during a psychotic episode or during a period of mania or very extreme depression, but that we do expect that people get better and that they will regain capacity. So for many serious mental illnesses, that might be kind of a fluctuating thing where a person has capacity sometimes and doesn't have capacity at other times. But when the person regains capacity, they should be able to resume active decision making in their health care. So this gets to that question. Must clinicians always honor the instructions? So the way the law is written in North Carolina, there are exceptions to when a clinician should follow the PAD. If what's asked for in the advanced instruction isn't consistent with generally accepted community practice standards, then those can be disregarded. That might be, say, if someone requests that their psychosis be treated with ginkgo biloba. That might be sort of saying, well, that's not a standard treatment. If the treatments requests are not feasible or not available, this gets complicated because in the way our health system works, lots of times where you can be hospitalized depends upon your insurance status, or whether you don't have insurance at all. And if somebody say they asked to be hospitalized in a hospital in another state, that just might not be feasible. So then it could be disregarded. And then if the treatments interfere with an emergency treatment that's needed, or if the person is under an involuntary commitment, that would override the Psychiatric Advance Directive, or if it conflicts with other laws. The important thing that if a person is under an involuntary commitment, but also has a Psychiatric Advance Directive, we would still hope that the treatment team would look at the advance directive and perhaps get some information that might be helpful in guiding the treatment and supporting the person's choice and preferences as much as possible, because they do serve as communication tools as well. So then what do you do with a Psychiatric Advance Directive once they're completed? We encourage people to make copies of it and to keep the original. And then the documents really have to be communicated to any treatment providers that are involved in the person's care, and also to any facility where they might show up in crisis. Like, let's say you were in Charlotte and Atrium Health was the place that you might go to in crisis. You would want to make sure that they had a copy of this document. It was in your medical record and accessible, and that there was a way for a responding treatment provider to see that you had this. And then we also encourage people to give copies to their support people, and certainly to a healthcare agent if they have one, and if possible, take it with them when they access crisis services. We even developed a little wallet card. Actually, I have one on my desk, a little wallet card that says, I have a Psychiatric Advance Directive. We tried to make it look official, and it has a place for summary information on the inside, so that if you didn't have that multi-page document on your person, that you might have something that says, hey, please look for this. And we knew the card didn't have the legal status, but perhaps would help prompt treatment providers to look for it. There's also an online repository at the North Carolina Secretary of State's website that's not as relevant now that there's so many electronic health records and records stored that way. So with the Crisis Navigation Project, what we were doing was providing training to 4 counties, people in 4 counties, Mecklenburg, Durham, Wake, and Cumberland, around what psychiatric advance directives are. And then we were recruiting people to go through facilitator training, so that we trained a number of people who could help people create their own psychiatric advance directives. And as we had some really good success with this in Charlotte starting in 2017. Now the project ended in June of 2021. So this specific grant-funded project ended, but hopefully some of the efforts are continuing with some of the people that we trained and who became sort of PAD champions in their communities. And I know we had several in Charlotte. But we also realized how complex this kind of dissemination is. You know, if we want to keep the person in the center, there were so many different places that person might touch, and all of these different intersecting systems also needed to know about psychiatric advance directives. One of the things we see sometimes is that even someone who has one, when they go to the emergency room, they might not look for it, or the triage nurse has never heard of them, or even the psychiatrist has never heard of them. So there's still lots of room for more education and knowledge development about them. I know we're getting close on time, and I want to leave a few minutes for questions. This is just a website for resources from the Secretary of State's office. There's an online repository there, but it's not as relevant since we have those electronic health records. This is the National Resource Center on Psychiatric Advance Directive. Marvin Swartz at Duke heads this up. And you can find information on the laws in every state at this website. And it's just if you put in NRC PAD, you can find it on the web. And this is the website for the Crisis Navigation Project, which still exists. The website still exists, even though the project ended. Under the Resources tab, we showed you one of the videos that we had created, but we have a whole series of videos with different points of view around psychiatric advance directives. And the resources will lead you to that. Or you can just search Crisis Navigation Project on YouTube and find our videos there. Also links to the forms themselves under our resources tab on that page. There's also, you may have heard of Wellness Recovery Action Planning, WRAP. That's also a wellness and crisis planning tool. One difference is that PADs are a legal tool and they have some legal power behind them. But a WRAP, they are complementary strategies. And then just in closing, if you need more information on these, that's Bob's information and my information. I'm at a new job, so the mental health initiative is a new thing for me. All right, I think we've got a few minutes left for questions.
Yes, I do have a question. Can you put into a PAD that you do not want certain people to be able to commit you, or perhaps you list people that are allowed to with backups? Thinking of instances where there's an abusive relationship or someone may try to get someone involuntarily committed.
Yeah, you can't say that in your PAD, you can't, I think anybody can take out papers, commitment papers, if they have that evidence, firsthand evidence of a person's history and dangerousness. But in the PAD, you can say, these are the people that I want involved in my care. These are the people to contact. And these are people that I do not want involved in my care. So it's really kind of a step before someone gets to that involuntary process, but it does give the person, as long as the treatment providers are respecting what's in the PAD, it does let the person state, these are the people I want involved, and these are people that I don't want you to contact. And that should hold some legal power.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. I actually do get this question occasionally in situations where people are concerned about misuse of the system or abusive relationships. And I would add, I think it's perfectly okay and probably be helpful to put information about that relationship and the nature of it in the PAD. This wouldn't be something that you would file with the magistrate's office. That's a public place, but what you could do is perhaps write a letter to the clerk of court and pass this on to the magistrates that you're concerned about this. Make sure that the information is vetted, or that there's so much, make sure that that their process is not being abused. There's no real legal authority with that, but it is sort of trying to give a little bit of notice about it. So I would take it, two different approaches, because Bebe's right. Pretty much anybody can take out that. These PADs don't have any authority to they're not a restraining order, for instance. And you could possibly do a restraining order, I guess, but that's not my field. But in any event, I think it's also partly the lawyers aren't familiar with the mental health process as much. We don't have a whole lot of people practicing in this area, so it's as people kind of step into this, I do believe there's a need. I need a list of lawyers who I can refer people to, because I get calls all the time.
Okay, and the next question is, how can we get involved? What opportunities exist to volunteer? Great question.
Oh, me.
Well, one of our key partners, particularly in the early stages of this crisis navigation project, was NAMI. And one of our original plans was to train NAMI volunteers in how to facilitate psychiatric advance directives. If anyone, I am no longer working with the Crisis Navigation Project. That's one of the challenges with grant-funded projects, because it did come to an end. But if anybody wants to reach out to me to kind of with just, I can give you some direction on where to go to connect with volunteer opportunities or how to get training in the future. I will still be offering training through Southern Regional AHAC on psychiatric advance directives, and hopefully we'll be doing a facilitator training in the future. But if you want to reach out to me, I can help connect you to resources. And we need more champions. We need more people who are willing to promote these ideas and to kind of promote the idea that people should be seen as human beings who have all the full rights and dignity that others have.
I thank you, Bebe, and I would definitely encourage you to contact Bebe. Myself, feel free to contact me. We also work with the Promise Resource Network. Shireen Carrico, I'm going to put a plug in for her.
Yes.
If you go, if you go to their site or look up Shireen Carrico, she's getting a national award on Monday evening from the Bazelon Center, Innovator of the Year. She's actually sharing the podium with Brian Stevenson and other notables. We're all kind of blown away by this, but Bebe was a really early partner and advocate for these, and I've worked with her organization and be happy to work with anybody in the future.
Listen, I have to say, volunteering with NAMI is one of the best things that I do. I say it all the time. I actually volunteer with the Piedmont, I think it's called Piedmont Tri-County Group down in Fort Mill, South Carolina. We're very active, and it's a great group. And it really is. It's one of the best things that I do. There are so many organizations out there who could use a little bit of help. And I thank you all for listing some. Their contact information is right there. So if you're interested, please get in touch. Our community always needs people helping other people. So Mr. Ward and Ms. Smith, thank you so much. This has been so informative. I wish you could feel how appreciative we all are. I know we all are. If you were in person, we would be applauding and full of praise.
I'm going to share this too. There was Jessica shared something I think which is important. She said, thank you for speaking on this topic. Wondering, since you're speaking on this, if you could remind everyone who could be facing some type of crisis or commitment about calling 911 and asking for a CIT officer, or calling mobile crisis at 704-566-3410, option 1. And she is an LCMCA in addition to being a paralegal. So I will share that on the group chat for everyone.
I might add too, reaching out before crisis is important. Promise Resource Network has a warm line. They're based in Charlotte. I don't have that number in my head, but if you looked up Promise Resource Network, I think sometimes people need support before they get to a crisis, and I would encourage people to explore those.
There are tons of free support groups out there too. I'm sorry, Bebe, I'm talking over you. I think you froze and then I started
talking. That's no problem. No problem at all.
Yay, Zoom. I was just saying that there are a lot of free support groups out there, not only for people, experiencing mental illness or who are working on their mental wellness plans, but also for the families of those who have a diagnosis. caregivers. I mean, LGBT, military families. There, I can't speak for every group. Obviously, I know NAMI best, but NAMI is working to train police officers in our community. I mean, it's just there are a lot of opportunities out there, and actually, NAMI has a walk every October. I think if you even just want to volunteer for the walk or something like that. So, Miss Smith, Mr. Ward, I really thank you very, very much. And I wish you were in person so we could thank you in person.